Okay, I see Curtis is on, but looks like we're having some technical difficulties with unmuting. Liz, from your end, can you unmute Curtis's login?
It's a privacy issue. I cannot unmute people.
Okay. Don't have that ability. All right.
Hear me? No, this is Andy Bambauer. To unmute, you have to press *6. It's not just the unmute button on your phone or computer.
Thank you for that.
This is Curtis. Got it. *6. Copy that.
Excellent. Well, good morning, Curtis. I hear you're there. I think we're ready to get started there. So, morning.
Sure.
Well, I think let's start by having Liz, if you can, instead of having everybody introduce herself, I think that could get a little unwieldy. Let's have Liz go through and go through a roll call of who she sees from her end as being logged on, and then I think we'll have a couple of folks who've just called in, and if they could announce themselves as well, that'd be great. So, but I'll start. This is John Yarbrough, the co-chair of the ad hoc group for DWR. And Liz, you take it away with roll call on the rest of us.
Okay, I'll call out the names as they appear in the participant list here in Teams, and I apologize ahead of time if I mispronounce your name. We have Andrew Baumbauer, Betty Andrews, Braden Pacini, Bruce Muller, Stephen Collins, Ted Craddock, David Duvall, Sergio Escobar, Mark Hafner, Les Harder, Lelio Mejia, Matt Murray, Michael Bissett, Rhonda Robbins, Rune Storson, David Sarkeesian, Paul Schweiger, Sean Early, Steve Varigan, Liza Whitmore, John, we already got you. And then I have some telephone numbers. Maybe if I read out the number, then the person can unmute themselves and say who they are. 530 area code 217-7214.
I'm dialed in for my phone, but I'm watching on the video. So.
Thank you.
I'm twice.
And area code 530-353-0342.
Corey Honey, Butte County Sheriff.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Oh, Sheriff.
Area code 916-532-7772.
Curtis with Assemblyman Gallagher's office.
Thank you. Area code 916-764-5200.
Rob Olmsted with Senator Jim Nielsen's office.
Thank you, Rob. And area code 916-653-4395.
Dave Sarkeesian, DWR.
Oh, thank you, David. And one more number, 2666-96687.
So John Lehi of DWR has joined.
Thank you, John. I see Nick Brubaker also has joined. Have I missed anybody?
Matt Mentink, Citizen Ad Hoc.
Thank you, Matt.
Bill Conley, District 1 Supervisor, Butte County. My number's blocked, that's why it doesn't show.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Liz, and thank you everybody for joining us here. This is definitely the sign of the times we're living in right now. This perhaps not the ideal way to hold this meeting, but still glad that we are able to get together and go through this work, even if in less than ideal circumstances here. Wanted to just real quickly walk through. So we're the platform here, as Liz mentioned, we started with everybody on mute. But you should be able to unmute yourselves. And so as we go through the presentations, I encourage you to, like we do if we're in person, if you have questions, unmute yourself and go ahead and ask the question there. We are going to have to really be mindful of, with number of people talking, that we really take turns, and just because it won't really work with multiple people talking at the same time on this video platform. In addition, we also have, there's a chat feature here on so it depends on if you're logging in from your phone or your computer, but there is a little chat button and so if you have questions or if you're having trouble unmuting yourself, as an alternative, you can type a question in the chat box, and at the end of each presentation, we'll be going through the, oh yeah, thank you, Liz. We'll be going through anything in the chat that we receive that way and answering those questions that way. There in the email invite that we sent out, we provided a number for Ethan, and I'll read his number here, but it's also in the email. It's area code 781-721-4130. And so if you're having any difficulties and need someone to help, please feel free to give Ethan a call, and hopefully he can help you out there. Let's see. As Liz mentioned, and as we've done with all our meetings, so we are recording this, so just make sure everyone's aware of that. That's pretty much the housekeeping items I wanted to go through. I wanted to then real quickly just talk about, by way of introduction, as we look at our agenda here. So the first up, we have the IRB. Initially, this ad hoc group meeting was going to be back in March, right after the 7th IRB meeting. Since we pushed the ad hoc group down, we've actually had another meeting of the IRB, our 8th IRB meeting that happened back a few weeks ago. And so we're going to have the IRB. We provided both of their reports for the ad hoc group to look at. And so Bruce will be walking through both of their reports coming out of both of those meetings. And then the next three presentations, the first one, the results of alternative plan formulation. What we're doing here is really looking at, as the analysis on the CNA is concluding, what are we seeing from that analysis, from that assessment. The next presentation, then Ted Craddock's going to give us, from the DWR perspective, as we look at all of the information we get out of the CNA, how does DWR, how are we going to turn around and use that? Where do we go next? And then the third presentation, DWR presentation, we'll have Dave Sarkeesian, our Chief Dam Safety Engineer, will walk through and elaborate on then what happens next here as we transition from the CNA into the post CNA world here. That's the quick overview. I think at this point we'll turn it over to see if Assemblyman Gallagher has any comments. I understand the senator was pulled away at the last minute, so he won't be able to join us. But Assemblyman, if you're here, and if you'd like to make a few opening statements, go ahead.
John, I don't think he's on the line right now. We can circle back later, but I think we just start diving in.
That sounds good. All right. So with that, our first presentation then is Bruce and the IRB report.
Okay, thanks, John. And I'll wait just a second for Liz to get this pulled up. And as John said, we've got two reports for you. We had a meeting February 27th through 28th, and then another meeting May 21st and 22nd of this year. So just for context, understand that what we present relative to meeting number 7 could have had additional discussion under meeting number 8. So have a little patience and let us get all the way through that, and we will be happy to entertain any questions at that point. So next slide. All right, just as a reminder of the members, and we have all of them here on the call today, Betty Andrews, Dr. Lilio Mejia, myself, Bruce Muller, and Paul Schweiger comprise the IRB at this point. Next slide. So taking a look at where we stand with respect to past recommendations, and this will be the status as of the end of our 8th meeting. Next slide. All right, so again, just a reminder of status descriptions. If it's listed as under consideration, it just means that the project team is still considering that recommendation, but really hasn't committed to if or how the recommendation will be addressed. If it's planned, the IRB has accepted the project team's response, and we think it's an appropriate action that they've planned. If it's in progress, we've actually seen evidence of the planned actions being underway. Next slide. If we've closed it, then the IRB has reviewed and confirmed that the project team's planned action has been completed and adequately addressed. If it's not adopted, that's just an indication that the project team didn't adopt the recommendation and has provided some sort of an explanation or will be providing an explanation. I think there were a few in this category that the scope of the analyses were well beyond what could be accomplished under the CNA study, and so those have been queued up to be, they're underway, but they just won't have the results in time to be incorporated into this particular report. And then finally, we had one that we classified as superseded simply because we wanted to clarify a prior recommendation. So next slide. So here's the quick summary. We don't include the recommendations from IRB number 8 because the project team hasn't had a chance to respond to those yet, as they just got our report. And so you can see overall, we're pretty pleased on the IRB to see that out of 73 recommendations through IRB number 7, 53 of those we've actually considered to be closed. 13 in progress, a couple planned, no longer have any that we would consider under consideration other than those that were made in IRB number 8. And 1 superseded, 4 of them not adopted. I think at least 2 of those are in that category of being beyond the scope of what could be accomplished during the CNA study. Next slide. So here's the report from meeting number 7. The first question was, did we have any recommendations or comments on the summary of risk assessments? We felt that it had been a systematic evaluation of the potential failure modes. We reviewed the differences from IRB number 6, the comparisons with the level 2 risk assessment effort we thought were mostly consistent. But we did recommend reviewing the significant differences, where there was perhaps more than an order of magnitude difference, to determine if one group was systematically higher or lower than the other group. And the 2 groups being the level 2 risk analysis team and the CNA risk estimators. But overall, I think the general conclusion that can be drawn is that the risks appear to be generally low. Next slide. Second question that was asked is, does the IRB have any recommendations or comments on the status of reports? First of all, just general comments. We certainly appreciate the use of color to identify the potential failure modes and risk levels and in terms of where they fall. We asked the team to reconsider the use of the term recommended measures, as it might convey a level of definitiveness that from what we heard was actually not intended. And then we suggested identifying documents and data sources that were used to characterize the existing conditions. Next slide. In terms of the public draft report, as of, let's see, I think even as of today, we've only seen a draft of the table of contents on the public report. But from that, it appears that it's got the appropriate content. We just recommended that they include a discussion of risk and what's called ALARP, or as low as reasonably practicable principles, so that there would be some context for anybody reading that report. In terms of the final overall project report, we felt like the report was in an advanced stage of preparation. We did have a number of editorial comments that we provided separately, mostly things that we didn't feel rose to the level of being in our formal report, but we saw it as an opportunity for the team to be able to clean some things up. Next slide. All right, on the task 1 report, this is the emergency spillway task. We just indicated that emphasis should be added regarding the importance of the Hyatt power plant. And the issue here is that operation of the emergency spillway potentially could lead to a backwater effect that would essentially have to or require the closure of the outlets at Hyatt. And that's your emergency evacuation for the reservoir. The task 4 report, and this is the various low-level outlets at the dam. We indicated that there's a need to emphasize the role of a low-level outlet in reducing risk for all PFMs. In essence, having low-level outlets provides an opportunity to intervene in most of the other potential failure modes if they were to begin to show signs. We also thought it was important to identify that the existing low-level outlet capacity does not meet DSOD guidelines. I will, however, qualify that by the fact that the DSOD guidelines currently apply to new dams. And so that's the kind of next bullet there, that while they're commonly applied to new dams, in a sense, Oroville has never been tested by a significant seismic event. And so it might be desirable or prudent to meet the guidelines. Now, the one thing I will say here is that this is really more of a conversation that needs to be had and a decision that needs to be made relative to new outlets, because while on one hand it would certainly be desirable to have a new outlet, that has to be balanced by the fact that doing a lake tap on a reservoir has a substantial amount of risk associated with that also. And so it could be that the solution presents more risk than what exists without the lower level outlet to be able to drain the lower part of the reservoir. So that's something that just needs to be looked at, and there needs to be a good conversation about that. That won't happen in the CNA. That'll be down the road, but it needs to get documented as to what the logic was behind whatever decision is made as to whether or not any additional low-level outlet capacity is provided. The other thing we noticed was that the power plant roof rockfall failure mode could have financial consequences even if no equipment is damaged, just from the standpoint that from a personnel safety consideration, there may be limited access for some period of time until you can establish that it is safe for people to enter the plant. And that would mean the inability to generate power and deliver water for whatever that period of time would be. Next slide. The Task 5 report, which is the embankments. This was, again, one of the areas where we wanted to see the studies identified that contributed to the CNA study. One example of that would be the study of the vegetated area. And we recommended some discussion of the hydraulic conditions in the reservoir under extreme hydrologic loads because there's kind of a unique phenomena that occurs in the arm of the reservoir by Parish Camp Saddle Dam, whereby it's possible that in that arm, due to flow conditions, the reservoir could actually be about a foot higher than at the main dam itself. And so that's something that'll come into play as you hear some more of the presentations today. Next slide. The third question that was asked of us was, does the IRB have any recommendations or comments on alternative plan formulation and recommendations? I think we felt that DWR had used a good structured process for formulating alternative plans. We supported their effectiveness scoring approach. In essence, this just being a way to try to go through the alternative plans and give them some weighted scores according to their objectives. We suggested that instead of trying to whittle it down to just a few alternatives that would be presented to decision makers, we thought that the objectives and the consequences are so diverse that it would be important to present the DWR decision makers with the full suite of plans that had been formulated in order to really allow for a more rich set of choices in terms of going forward. And then in IRB number 7, we recommended expedited implementation of some of the low-cost measures that were part of all alternative plans. And specifically, this was kind of a group of about 3 measures that had been recommended that were relatively low cost to where implementing them could actually be maybe even less than further studies, or if not less, certainly not much more than the cost of doing additional further studies on these measures. Next slide. The fourth question was, did we have any recommendations or comments on the comment log? And as usual, we updated it and provided that. There was one item of note that on recommendation from the first IRB meeting, number 16, recommendation number 16, that the climate change studies won't be ready for inclusion in the CNA. And our suggestion was that the discussion in the CNA really focus on how climate change would be addressed as plans or measures were advanced. And so just giving some context of how that would be done would certainly be helpful. Next slide. And did we have any recommendations or comments on the schedule and next steps, which we did not? Next slide. And does the IRB have any other recommendations or comments, kind of the general catch-all? I think in general, we saw this as an extraordinary effort to process a large number of potential failure modes, risk reduction measures, and alternative plans. We really felt like that DWR has created for themselves a model that could be used for other facilities. I think the reports that they're developing provide the framework from which they can take a good, solid look at all of their facilities. But I think at the same time, not everything needs to be done to the same scale that it's been done for Oroville. Supporting studies, could certainly be scaled as necessary to address the components of some of the other projects that need to be assessed. But I think having been through it once and really trying to do the very best job they can, I think they'll have a much better feel for how to focus their effort for some of those other facilities, and be able to get through those a little more efficiently, now that they've had the chance to spend their time shaping this one and figuring out how to move through the process. Next slide. So moving on to IRB number 8, next slide. Does the IRB have any recommendations or comments on the risk assessments or alternative plans? So one of the things we noticed was that in describing the alternative plans, there were about 11 of the 33 recommended measures that dropped off the table. And while we didn't see a good explanation of that in the report, the team gave us a good explanation when we were actually in the meeting. So we just recommended that they clarify the process that they used and be sure that they document that in the report, for how those 11 measures essentially ended up not making it into any of the recommended plans. And I think we would concur. I don't think we saw any of those 11 that we felt should have been incorporated into plans. We just thought that there needed to be a better explanation of how they went through the process to eliminate them. The other thing that we suggested in IRB number 8 was that they put together a plan that we called Plan 0 with just the interim risk reduction measures. This would be an opportunity to take those measures that were such low cost to be able to implement, lump them together and say, a first plan could be to simply implement those without a great deal of additional study and without a great deal of taking additional time to do it. And then we also suggested considering a measure to raise only those portions of the dam needing to be raised. So one of the things we noticed was in some of the data that DWR provided, the settlement of the dam has really not been as much as what was anticipated in the original design. And so there are portions of the dam that are much higher than the stated crest of the dam. And so it turns out that if you wanted to raise Oroville Dam, it may be that you only need to raise much shorter sections at the ends of the dam where not as much camber was provided in the original design of the dam. Next slide. Second question that was asked was, does the IRB have any recommendations or comments on the CNA project findings and recommendations? So the first thing we suggested was that DWR use more risk-informed language in terms of presenting the findings and recommendations. Some of the draft findings and recommendations, or more so the draft findings, were really in the context of regulatory language, like, no deficiencies, things like that. And our suggestion was that they leave the regulatory language statements to the Part 12D process, where we think that that's more appropriate to make those statements there, and that because this was a risk-informed study, to try to capture the findings in more of a risk-informed language in presenting what they have found. We also suggested adding discussions and a finding relative to reservoir evacuation capability. So this relates back to the item that I talked about for IRB number 7. And so what we found was that they had provided a great deal of information on reservoir evacuation capability, but it was in an appendix to the task 4 report. And we really felt that this issue is significant enough in that it's one of those cross-cutting issues or cross-cutting risk reduction opportunities that it really ought to be discussed in the overall project report. We asked the team to reconsider their finding of no unacceptable risks. And while technically correct in terms of how they're presenting the data, there's also an explanation in the data that some of the reason that they considered measures below the tolerable risk limit was in order to make sure that they considered the notion of uncertainties in the risk estimates. And so in a number of cases, they considered risk reduction measures for risks that were up to 3 orders of magnitude below the threshold of tolerable risk. And so in light of taking that approach, we thought that it might be a little bit strong of a statement to say that there was a finding of no unacceptable risks. Now, at the same time, I will tell you that in the risk plots, there is nothing that would indicate that there's an immediate risk that would be cause for some sort of immediate action. The risks actually there's 2 risks that tend to plot kind of or straddle the tolerable risk guideline. So with that, I don't think there's any cause for concerns. I just don't think that it's quite cut and dry that there's a finding of no unacceptable risks. For the PFMs highlighted due to financial risks, we suggested that DWR consider using a simple financial analysis to determine the value of proceeding with any risk reduction actions for those potential failure modes. Next slide. And did we have any recommendations on the comments or on the comment log? And we reviewed the master comment log and updated it with where we saw the status and provided that to DWR. Next slide. And did we have any recommendations or comments on the reports? So on the overall project report, we asked DWR to provide some additional context in the report to orient the reader. We asked them to explain the reasons for the different paths for tasks 2 and 6. So task 2 is operations, task 6 is surveillance and monitoring. And I think it makes the IRB thought it made sense that those 2 had different paths. And we just think that that needs to be explained in the report as to why. And I think the principal reason for the difference is those 2 tasks are not infrastructure tasks, whereas the other 4 tasks specifically relate to infrastructure. We also asked that they explain why the results are generally presented for just 2 consequence categories. Again, this is just about explaining it. We think it makes complete sense that primarily the risks are coming from life safety and financial consequence. And so those are the things that really stand out in the report. But we think that it's just as important to indicate why some of the other consequence categories don't show risks that are anywhere near as high as these. We suggested that they include some of the key risk summary graphics in the executive summary. There's some good graphics that really help understand where the risks lie. And we just thought that it would be a good opportunity to be sure those are in the executive summary, so that people who don't necessarily want to read the entire report can get a good understanding of where the risks lie for the project. We also suggested enhancing Table 2 to indicate the project feature to which various measures apply, and revising some of the probability labels in the asset management matrix to be more mathematically consistent. This isn't something that changes any results, but what it was a distraction from the message that was trying to be conveyed in those tables and graphics. And then we also asked for a graphical presentation of the comparison of the CNA and the Level 2 risk assessment risk estimates. We had seen that in an earlier meeting. We thought that was extremely useful, but yeah, we did not see that in the draft reports that we had available to review. Next slide. And did we have any recommendations or comments on the project schedule? The only comment that we had was that the team was not able to provide a draft of the Task 6 report at the time of our meeting. And so we just thought it was important to point out that the project schedule is based on the assumption that the completion of the Task 6 report would not impact the completion of other reports that have been further along. And that's a significant assumption, and it's just a potential risk to the project schedule. I think the team probably has a much better sense of whether or not there could be any impacts, but we'll leave that to the team. We just thought it was important that, having not seen the Task 6 report as an IRB, we really didn't have enough information to know whether or not that report could in any way impact any of the other task reports. Next slide. And did we have any other recommendations or comments? Again, an extraordinary effort gone into advancing the various project reports. And we certainly appreciated the kind of special effort that's gone into, like this meeting, just being able to make the IRB meeting number 8 happen, so that they could proceed with being able to move forward with the CNA study. Next slide. And with that, that's the end of our report. Certainly open to questions. Maybe one question. I understand that Rune had submitted some questions to DWR either late yesterday or this morning. And while most of those questions, I think, really apply directly to DWR to answer, I think there was one in there, or several of them, that alluded to the notion of a factor of safety. And I would just caution everybody to be very careful with the notion of a factor of safety. I've seen many cases in dam safety where when you begin to really look at things in a risk context, that you start asking many more questions than are asked through standard deterministic analyses that lead to factors of safety. And you can make errors both ways with factors of safety, that in a large number of cases where factors of safety are computed, they are only computed for those things that we know how to analyze. And it's a significant risk to believe that just because somebody has computed a factor of safety, that is adequate for a full understanding of the risks posed by a dam. So with that, I'll be happy to open it up.
Bruce?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for such great insight. Question on the low-level outlet. You referenced DSOD regulations. What's FERC's position on that? Do they grandfather the inability to dewater the bottom of the reservoir, or do they have some requirement for even older dams to meet that?
So I can't speak directly. FERC would have to speak for themselves, I think, on that one. But what I can tell you is that you generally don't see, I don't know of any dam owner who has been required to go back and add a low-level outlet to meet low-level outlet capacity requirements.
The advantages of that, I think, is plain for all of us to see. What's not easy to see is the risk level involved in tapping the dam. Could you elaborate?
So essentially what you're looking at doing, and if you want to get a sense of kind of how this is done, Lake Mead over at Hoover Dam has been tapped either 2 or 3 times now as the water level has fallen on the Colorado River. But in essence, you end up drilling a tunnel to within a safe distance of the reservoir, and then you go ahead and through underwater construction build the intake and then seal it off while you then complete the tunnel up to that intake.
From what you know about the geology of the hillside, moving away from the dam and doing such a thing at Oroville, you're at 1 to 5. What's the level of risk?
Oh gosh. So I would put it in the context of what we saw of the geology in terms of the erosion in the spillway chute area, that it was significantly poorer than what we had anticipated. But I think the flip side of that is that if you decided that this was something you really wanted to do, I think that lesson has led to the fact that, you know, a great deal more investigation would be done into the geology in order to understand exactly how to go about making that lake tap in the safest possible manner.
Thank you. John? John?
Yes.
Question, is this our final meeting, or are we going to have opportunities to be able to follow back up on all these excellent points that were raised by the IRB and questions that we have, to have a chance to look at the final reports and final decisions, or is everything shifting over to the Citizens Oversight Group after today?
We're picturing having one more IRB meeting, and then following that, we'd have one more ad hoc group meeting.
Excellent.
So we are expecting to have more ad hoc group meeting.
So we can go ahead.
And then it does look like that probably would be the last one in which we conclude this. And then, as you mentioned, we would shift over to the Citizens Advisory Commission as the forum to continue to follow efforts as they move forward.
Excellent. So we'll have the same opportunities to submit after meeting questions and have them answered, and a chance to see the progress on IRB recommendation logs on the next meeting. Thank you.
Liz, are there any questions that came through from the chat?
No, I don't see any.
Okay, well, unless there are any more questions, Bruce, thank you very much. looking at time, we should keep ourselves moving. So next up we have Sergio.
Well, good morning, everyone. We should probably just go ahead and get started. So as Bruce mentioned, we have had 2 meetings since we last met. My presentation is going to address or cover both meetings at a somewhat high level. So if there are any questions, please ask. Next slide. This is just a reminder of our commitment to both FERC and DSOD, where we sent a letter in January of 2018 referencing letters that were sent in 2017 during the spillway reconstructions. So this letter basically said that we were getting ready to undertake our commitment to complete the comprehensive needs assessment. And it also included what the outcome was, and that is we're going to have a list of prioritized dam safety and operational reliability needs. And then these needs will subsequently be evaluated by DWR management and scheduled through the normal permitting processes through the 2 regulators. Next slide, please. So at a high level, what was the CNA mission? One is identify and prioritize dam safety and operational needs. And we've done that through the potential failure mode process, identifying measures to reduce the high risk or the risk associated with those PFMs. And then we use those measures to develop potential alternative plans. And that's what we're going to be presenting, or that's basically our list per IRB recommendation for us to not only show 1 or 3 or 5, but we developed a total 10 plans, and that's what we're going to recommend. Next slide. So this is the matrix that we used. If you guys recall, when we started this effort, approximately 2 years prior, DWR O&M Asset Management had already started working on a framework to look at risk for state water project facilities. When we started this project, we took a look at that information and noticed that it really didn't meet the needs of a dam safety risk assessment. So one of the things that we did, we added 4 additional rows and added 4 additional columns and added 3 additional rows. And one of the things that we've also done is superimposed the information from the federal risk FN chart. That is what's commonly used by the federal agencies such as FERC and the Corps of Engineers. And the heavy dashed line is the tolerable risk line. So items that are plotted above that line, there is an impetus to develop projects and implement projects to reduce those risks to below that tolerable risk line. The other item is between the dashed line and the dotted line, which is the area of as low as reasonable practicable, which is commonly just called out as ALARP. And in this area, there's also a need to develop projects, but it's in this area, it's not as critical that those projects be implemented. If the costs are astronomical and you're not really reducing the risk, then it doesn't make sense to implement those projects. The box that's gray in nature, this area is a special case area. The federal agencies treat it as a special case area, and simply because the probabilities are so low, but yet the risk consequences are so high. So that's again an area that's a case by case basis. And then the area that's below the heavy dotted line, there's also one should look at projects or measures to reduce risk there, but it's not as critical that it be done. Next slide. So these are our final results from all of our work. We ended up doing a full analysis on 129 PFMs. 54 of those, or approximately 42% of them, plotted in the negligible line. Additionally, the IRB for meeting number 8 asked us to separate those failure modes that were financial and those that were life loss oriented. So out of the 129, 105 were dominated by life loss, and 24 were basically financial. Next slide. So this matrix are the results from the L2RA effort. And if you recall, this effort was mandated by Congress, where Congress asked that FERC required DWR to go out and get an independent consultant, use independent subject matter experts, and there was a plan put together where an independent consultant was proposed. Subject matter experts were also proposed, and all this work was at the recommendation of the ASDSO. So with respect to the SMEs or subject matter experts, not only did we have experts from the dam industry within the United States, but we had them coming from across the pond. So it was a huge effort, and they evaluated a total of 165 PFMs, but they also had a much greater number that they considered negligible, and that was 98, which is approximately 59 of their PFMs they considered to be negligible. I guess the other thing I speak to when we compare these two slides, for the most part, we have fair agreement. There are some that are within an order of magnitude from one another. And most importantly, the measures that we have developed within the CNA project address all of their measures also that have plotted along the line or above the line. Next slide. So now moving on to the measures, we used a total of 31 failure modes or potential failure modes to develop our measures. 33 measures were developed as a result of these 31 failure modes that were used. Next slide. So what were our major findings? So number one is no dam safety deficiencies were identified. And these were FERC and DSOD standards. From speaking with the regulators, I think they're changing this standard a little. So my next slide reflects what our wording is going to be changed going forward per IRB meeting number 8 comment. Secondly, for a handful of PFMs that are the highest, additional analysis is required. And one of these is the flood control outlet structural analysis. The analysis actually started before the CNA started, and it's expected to be completed either the latter part of this year or early 2021. So as soon as that information comes in, we'll be able to go back and take a look at what those results tell us in terms of any potential deficiencies on the structure. The other item is the contact between the right side of the embankment and where the leftmost monolith, this is a part of the concrete structure, interact with one another. There's a potential for some seepage to occur in that contact point. We recognize that, and the Part 12 board has a recommendation for some exploration work to take place there. So we'll again, once that work takes place, we'll have better understanding of those conditions between the embankment and the concrete structure. Next, some PFMs could actually be an order of magnitude higher or lower due to some uncertainty. This was a semi-quantitative analysis. In order for us to refine those risks, there needs to be studies and additional field work and a full feasibility with a quantitative analysis study. It needs to be performed. The last item, there's opportunity to further reduce risk of failure and reduce risk of flooding, both identified and articulated. And I think we have identified some projects that could be implemented in the near future to address some of the risk. So David Sarkeesian will actually speak to those in his presentation. Next slide, please. So after meeting number 8, our revised dam safety finding language is going to change to read, all of the risk estimates made by the CNA teams fell into either broadly accepted or tolerable risk zones. No unacceptable risk. Those that might fall above the tolerable risk line were identified. As a result, no dam safety issues were identified that exhibit a need for immediate risk reduction actions. This finding and the use of the risk tolerance guidelines are consistent with risk-informed decision-making practices in use by federal agencies with large portfolio of dams and dam safety programs guided by risk-based processes or approaches. So as some of you may know, DWR has also a portfolio of dams. So we are fully embracing this statement that, we have no dam safety issues that need immediate risk reduction actions. Next slide, please. We have also reviewed a draft copy of the recommendations from the 10th Part 12 independent consultant, and these Part 12 boards are evaluate the facility on a 5-year basis. And one of the recommendations is that the project is suitable for continued safe and reliable operation. No emergency or remedial measures are necessary for continued safe operation. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to touch on how we formulated the alternative plans. We held a total of 3 workshops to formulate, first create or formulate, evaluate, refine these plans. So we first started off with an early on IRB recommendation, and that was to build the plans based on themes. And we built them taking into account the 33 measures that were developed as part of our process. Through a series of workshops, there were a number of measures that the teams or the group that consisted of approximately 20 didn't feel or didn't think that a given measure deserved to be incorporated or would address that particular thing. So we ended up eliminating some measures due to that. There were other measures that were very similar, or we could not really. So there were some structural measures that we felt it was best to just combine and call it a structural measure instead of identifying given aspects, simply due to the fact that the structural analysis has yet to be completed, and we would just be guessing. So we just thought that it made sense to call it structural improvements and use that as our measure going forward. So we ended up using 22 measures. We went ahead and built these plans also to meet the objectives and constraints that were identified early on. And then we went ahead and refined the plans. Next slide, please. So we needed a way to weight the plans. So one of the things that we looked at was 3 criteria. One, and most importantly, is does it achieve risk reduction, residual risk? Secondly, does it promote resiliency? And the prepare, absorb, recover, and adapt is, in essence, what the Corps of Engineers uses when it comes to resiliency. And then with any project, we need to use good engineering. We do not want to recommend something that the risks are greater than the benefits. So This is the criteria that was used to weight the plans. Next slide, please. So here's a list of our plans. We ended up with a total of 10 plans, and again, the total weighted benefit at the bottom only takes into account the 3 scoring criteria. It does not account or include cost or any other information that would be used to prioritize these plans. So with respect to the weighted score, for the most part, the first 6 plans all score relatively close to one another, and I think that could be expected, given that it's a semi-quantitative risk analysis. In order to put refinement on this, as I mentioned, we will need to do additional studies, some field work, and prepare a feasibility study with a quantitative analysis. The other item that I would like to point out to the group here, 5 of the 22 measures are common to all of the plans. And David Sarkeesian is going to speak to some of these that we're going to implement in the near future. The other item that I would like to also share with you is that, there's been quite a bit of talk with respect to a low-level outlet. 7 of the 10 plans include a low-level outlet. So DWR, is looking at that, but we're going to need to look at the risk. Tapping into a reservoir that has 500 or depending on the time of year, could have up to 500 feet ahead. There's significant risk associated with doing that. So we will continue looking at that. But again, I can't stress that the benefits may not outweigh the risk. Next slide. So the alternative plans, again, the first bullet, we're replacing it with no dam safety issues instead of deficiencies. And then the plans identified through the CNA will enhance system operations and reliability. And lastly, the benefits of each plan, along with their costs, will be considered through the State Water Project Asset Management Program processes. So I think that's the last slide that I have. Any questions?
Sergio?
Yes.
What's the time frame on the evaluation and determination of the selection by senior management on the plans?
I'll defer that to Ted. We're scheduled to complete our work now at the end of August, and I think as part of this evaluation, we're going to look at the portfolio across the State Water Project. So my and maybe I'll stop there and let Ted.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, good morning, Matt. This is Ted. Are you able to hear me?
I am. Thank you.
Oh, very good. Yeah, so I, maybe to to answer your question, the next couple of presentations we have were intended to help describe the process we'll go through to start initiating work on some of the measures identified. Some of the measures are studies that will require further work. And so if it makes sense, Matt, maybe we can walk through those and then see if that helped address your question, and then talk more at the conclusion.
Yeah, thank you.
Liz, do we have any questions that came in through the chat?
We don't, John.
All right, well, in order to keep us moving here, how about at this time, let's shift over to our next presentation. If you have questions, of course, feel free to send in the chat or go off mute and let us know, but not hearing any immediate questions, I think we'll keep moving forward. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Ted for our next presentation.
Yeah, thank you, John, and good to talk to everybody today. Wish, as John mentioned, wish we were in person, but glad we're able to connect, and look forward to our next meeting as well, and hopefully that one will be in person. So what we thought, and this is maybe building on your question, Matt, that it'd be helpful to really share a little more detail on how we'll now use the information as we're getting near the end of completing the comprehensive needs assessment study. That study, of course, is very focused on a comprehensive review of the Oroville facilities. So that's one large initiative we have for the Oroville facilities. And then additionally, complementary to that, as Sergio and Bruce talked about, is the level 2 risk assessment. And so there, were similarities in those two efforts, but fully independent. But we wanted to make sure the CNA process was aware of the work being done in the level 2. So as we were developing measures, the efforts were complementary. And additionally, what's shown here is some other major tracks of work we have planned at the Oroville facilities. So one is on the left side of this graphic is what we're characterizing it as our pre-comprehensive needs assessment capital improvement plan, but it's really the existing capital improvement program that's occurring at the Oroville facilities. Then we also have a series of recommendations for a variety of work that come out of the 5-year FERC Part 12 dam safety review process. So we're expecting to receive the final report from that effort later this year, which will then trigger a process we go through of identifying actions to take to address the comments made by the Part 12 group. And then ultimately that results in some level of work plan as well. Then additionally, we've are embarking on an update of the water control manual for the Oroville facilities, or the flood control manual is I think is maybe a better way to call it. And that's being done in partnership with the Corps of Engineers and Yuba Water Agency. And I think we've talked about that a little bit in this prior, and also at the Citizens Advisory Commission, most recent one. That also includes different elements of that study, such as forecast informed reservoir operation, and then it'll be what we envision. It'll be important for us to conduct that study in parallel with our assessments of the flood control outlet and low level outlet analysis that will result from the recommendations coming out of the comprehensive needs assessment. And that'd be very similar to the flood control manual update and facility review that was done at Folsom Dam, for example. Liz, could you go to the next slide? So this slide is similar to the past one, but presenting kind of those major tracks in a little bit different view. One thing I forgot to mention on the prior slide is, in addition to those kind of 4 major assessment tracks for the Oroville facilities, we also have our routine maintenance activities that occur too. As we plan out work across the state water project in the Oroville facilities, we break them into 2 types of work in terms of our budget planning and work planning. We characterize one as our regular maintenance activity, and then as there's special projects done, we plan those differently because there are additional things we're doing beyond our regular maintenance plans that do work across the state water project. So we're focused on these special efforts that we do as part of the facility upgrades and refurbishments and modernization efforts. So this presents those kind of 4 major buckets from the prior slide in terms of a dam safety track, and then also a system enhancement track. And then our intention is to give you kind of a higher level overview of what will come next. Dave Sarkisian in the next presentation is going to talk in much more detail on the specific activities. This is a very general assessment, and then what we're envisioning is that the next ad hoc group meeting and the subsequent citizen advisory commission or citizen advisory commission meetings, that we'll have an opportunity to then share as we develop the more detailed work plans with this group and the rest of the community, and track progress as we move forward. But on the dam safety side, as Sergio mentioned, there were no immediate dam safety items that were identified from the comprehensive needs study that require immediate attention. However, there are a series of measures being recommended, and then there's 2 areas that we have ongoing studies on that may result in some findings to work that kind of rise, I think, to the top. And one is the structural analysis we're doing of the flood control outlet, and as Sergio mentioned, we expect that to be done early next year. That particular study will help us understand is there some level of refurbishment or enhancement needed at the headwork structure. So this is the headwork structure for the main spillway. And then additionally studying the contact between the headworks and the out and the main dam itself. And then additionally the level 2 independent review, as we talked about, we've intended to cover the recommendations coming out of that with the alternative plans, and Dave Sarkisian will talk about the variety of work activities, and then the Part 12D final report. And then in what we're characterizing here as system enhancements is the CNA is also recommending a series of measures or plans that may not be dam safety, but are enhancements to the system. Those could be things such as the redundancy of power supply at for the radial gate structure on the headworks, and then also perhaps additional modifications we make at the emergency spillway or low-level outlet. Both those, larger items are going to require additional study, as I mentioned, in complement or in parallel with the flood control manual update, so that, the latest information we have on the flood control or the hydrology and flood control of the system is informed, our facility study is informed by that. And then that kind of is the segue. We are showing the track for the flood control manual update that's underway as well. Next slide, Liz. And so this is maybe to capture, what follows from the comprehensive needs assessment. I think I've talked about this in a level of detail already, but again, there were no immediate items identified. However, we have the suite of studies. Dave will talk in more detail that are underway. We're implementing a series of measures and plans. And then, the CNA also gave us an understanding of several areas for further study. And you'll see in Dave's presentation, there's a whole suite of activity identified for us to do. Liz, is there another slide, or was this the closing point? Okay, thanks. If you wouldn't mind advancing through the bullet points so they show up. Thank you. And maybe one more. I think there may be one more bullet point. And so, as we move forward, really our goals are to, build upon the recent improvements we made to the spillway. So that's, one major goal as part of the spillway recovery efforts. Dave will talk about these early implementation activities that we're doing, the suite of investigations and studies. And Sergio mentioned this, but I think it's important to point out is so we've done this risk assessment specific to the Oroville facilities. We also, across the State Water Project, are doing a risk-informed planning effort as part of our annual work planning, as we organize our work plans for each year and then update those. So we will be going through an effort of, as we identify, here's a measure we're proposing at Oroville, to at least compare that to the other work that is proposed across the system, to make sure that we're focusing the overall resources on the highest risk projects. And just, for an example, there's a similar study underway for facilities at Castaic Lake and Pyramid Lake. And so we need to make sure that, we're focusing resources on highest risk measures, but there's definitely a suite of work here at Oroville that we plan to move forward with, and Dave's going to talk more about that. So that was a general overview. I wonder, John, and in the group, if it makes sense to move into David Sarkissian's presentation prior to questions, just because I think he's going to add a lot of detail to this overview, but I'm definitely open for questions as well at this time. So.
Okay, I think, Liz, did we get any questions in the chat?
We did not.
Okay, well, let's go ahead. I think that makes sense to dive into TED. So we'll proceed doing that. Of course, if you have a question, definitely take yourself off mute and let us know, or send us a note in the chat. But while that's going on, I think let's get Dave set up here. And Dave, why don't you take us away in the next presentation, because I do think that's going to really elaborate on the direction that Ted just laid out there for us.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. So, yeah,
okay.
Thank you very much,
great.
Ted, and take it away.
Okay, thank you, John. So yeah, I've got some more detail, maybe some more tangible information on some of the efforts moving forward, and really where Mr. Craddock left off in terms of prioritizing our work in the context of risk is really where we're heading, and it's helping us tremendously because we have a large body of work within our state water project dam safety program alone, and with all the other state water project assets, the aqueduct, pipelines, plants, there's a body of work there too, and so our effort here, and it's really was led by our asset management program, is to identify the risks and prioritize our work so that we're reducing risk across all the assets, and with public safety, as our driving goal. So let's advance to the next slide, Liz. So I included a slide similar to Sergio on this letter from early 2018, communicating to, in this case, FERC, but we had a similar letter to DSOD, explaining what we thought the outcome of this project would be. And I just want to highlight the middle of the paragraph there in terms of evaluated by DWR management and scheduled as projects through normal practices and procedures. And so what we meant there was our risk management framework and processes. We're looking at the projects in a risk-informed manner and approaching the high-risk issues first. The second piece is the regulatory processes, recognizing that we were coming off of the the recovery efforts for the spillway, and those were really conducted at an emergency pace. Incredible collaboration between the department, our stakeholders, our regulators, our consultant support. It was amazing what that effort accomplished in that short time. And we needed to recognize that what we find from CNA will more than likely return to the normal processes, the normal regulatory processes. So these measures, many of them will require a CEQA effort, environmental permitting, and that can be a very lengthy effort. Require, of course, DSOD reviews and FERC reviews. And so these projects, they'll take a little bit longer time. And so we just wanted to make sure that our regulatory agencies recognized that and understood that. The other piece, the early implementation, and that's really, I think, where I've been really, really excited by what CNA has identified and how the IRB has encouraged us to take on some of these early implementation projects, and that's been really beneficial. It's really, I think, helped accelerate decision-making and is going to lead to some interesting and great work in the next couple of years, and even in the present. So let's advance the slide, please. Thank you. So we've got basically kind of 5 steps or 5 groups of efforts, and I'm going to do my best to explain what they are and why we're doing them. The first is to complete CNA early implementation projects. So I've got a couple slides to walk you through those efforts. The second, initiate design of efficient CNA risk reduction measures. And you might recall on Sergio's presentation, he had a slide where there were a number of measures that show up on many, if not all, the plans. That being the FCO gate backup power starter, lining Palermo Canal, and raising Parish Camp Saddle Dam. These are, things that were identified by the IRB that we ought to think about initiating now, and so we're going to be doing that. And they're not insignificant projects, especially raising Parish Camp Saddle Dam. That'll take a fair amount of design, a fair amount of environmental permitting, and it's a good solid investment by the department. The third group is implement pre-CNA the $224 million planned capital investment, and so I've got a slide identifying some of the projects that fall under that group. Item 4, plan and schedule investigations, studies, and surveillance enhancements. So that would include things identified through the CNA effort, also the L2RA effort, and our Part 12 recommendations that we'll be receiving. Things that are needed to reduce uncertainty, things that are needed, studies that are needed to better understand the condition of a certain asset, and then also surveillance enhancements, of course. And lastly, I'll touch upon integrating select CNA measures into the State Water Project risk framework and processes, and kind of how we do that. So all these steps, although they have maybe different time frames, they all work to reduce risk at the Oroville facilities. Next slide, Liz. So the first early implementation project I just wanted to give you an update on was the installation of new piezometers at the Oroville Main Dam at the downstream toe, and these have been installed. We've got, in fact, I think they may have the automated real-time instrumentation installed within them as well. And so why did we do that? Well, it was identified as an action that made a very sensible investment to enhance our surveillance, in particular for internal erosion-related potential failure modes. These piezometers will inform the ongoing seepage analyses and modeling. And we have that toe seepage weir. These piezometers will be just an additional way to understand, how seepage is occurring and collecting at the toe of the dam. And in the profile there, you can see kind of the internal seepage pool. A couple of piezometers went through that and went to the foundation, and then we've got a couple downstream of that barrier, that little internal barrier dam, Zone 1A and Zone 2A. And so that's really going to help us, particularly with the modeling that's underway, to kind of discern between foundation seepage and seepage that's collected behind that barrier. And just to note that this originated as a measure out of Task 5, which was the embankments, and through the CNA process, handed off to Task 6 that was dealing with instrumentation, and then advanced to completion, with the good advice of the IRB. If we could advance.
Dave?
Sure.
Are you gathering data from that already? And if so, is it telling us the efficiency of the collection weir, or lack of efficiency?
Well, I'd say I haven't seen the data personally. I know Dr. Harder's seen some of it. I wouldn't say that the seepage weir is inefficient. I think yes, we have low seepage, but this is going to help us understand, why that is.
Okay.
And so, more to come. In fact, as we meet down the road, that'll be something that we could share, what we're seeing.
Thank you.
Sure. The next early implementation project are the proposed installation of new piezometers in the main dam in the grout and core block galleries. Why do we want to do this? We want to replace, in some case, original instrumentation, but then also enhance monitoring of foundation-related internal erosion potential failure modes. And so the graphic there just shows you, in general sense, some of the installations that are proposed. We've submitted our plan to FERC and DSOD, and we're expecting some technical comments, so we'll have to work through the comments, and potentially this, just based on kind of workflow, I'm kind of seeing this potentially as something that actually gets installed in 2021, just based on the time it takes to get through comments. Wanted to point out that these help us with those blue bubbles or dots, that the blue arrow points to. That's where these foundation-related internal erosion PFMs plot. The other benefit, these will also help us once again with that seepage analysis, but also we've got a plan in the future to do some foundation drain cleaning, and I'd like to see these piezometers get installed in advance of the cleaning, so that once we do the cleaning, we can, we may see a change in the pore pressures recorded and see that our cleaning is being effective. And so there's multiple reasons to install these, and so we're looking forward to get that work done in the future. Next slide. So another one, installation of new piezometers at the flood control outlet headwork structure foundation. This was identified by Task 3 and then advanced, which was the FCO, and advanced to Task 6 dealing with instrumentation. Why do we want to do it? We want to replace original instrumentation, monitor uplift pressures to inform those ongoing analyses of the FCO, and it'll give us a good understanding of the grout curtain performance. And so this entails drilling through the piers at an angle to install piezometers right below the foundation of the structure, and so that we can monitor uplift pressures. And those are really going to be helpful in the stability analyses, and specifically, you can see that failure mode 11 in the black bubble, T3-11. And so this is a measure to monitor that very potential failure mode. We have received both FERC and DSOD approval, and we are working to get this work scheduled in August, when the lake's already below 813, so the lake's receding. That was one of the criteria we wanted to have when we install these, with no water against the structure. And so we're looking forward to getting these installed, and we'll learn a lot. We'll learn a lot from this. Next slide. Okay, so the second grouping, initiate design of effective CNA measures. And so this was another area where the IRB really helped us and point out that these are some measures that are common to your plans. They make sense. They don't need more study. We don't need another 3 years of studies to make decisions on things like this. And so we concur. These are items that we want to pursue, and start initiating that process of design and get them into our plan. And so each of these I'll speak a little bit more to in the upcoming slides, but I just wanted to revisit how these show across multiple plans. If you could advance. Okay, so I wanted to point out where these plot on the risk matrix. And so let's start with 38. Which is the blue dot, the big blue arrow. So the raising of Parish Camp Saddle Dam, that's going to help address extreme flood and internal erosion related failure modes, 33, 34, 37, and 38 related to Parish Camp. I've got a little bit more to get into detail there, but I just want to, I guess the theme of this, part of this is that a single measure can address multiple failure modes. And that's, I think, part of the thinking of why these are prudent things to move forward with. In orange, you can see the lining of Palermo Canal, addresses a couple there. And then FCO radio gate backup power starter addresses kind of power-related failure modes. With those systems, there are a couple identified there where having a redundant system to the existing redundancy, makes sense. So once again, things that don't need further study, things that are significant projects, and so they still got to go through the regular processes with the regulators and environmental and CEQA, but things that we look forward to getting started on in the very near future. Next slide. So this just demonstrates the risk reduction that these projects can accomplish. I think this does appear, I think, in the CNA, maybe the CEII report, just demonstrating, how we move these PFMs with these measures. And in this case, they're all moving vertically down, becoming less likely with the implementation of a measure. Next slide. So a little bit more information on the radio gate backup power starter measure. We already have redundant multiple sources of power to power these gates. We also have, it has an existing standby generator. But the concept here is to have a capability to bring in a portable generator and making quick connections, so to speak, to be able to operate these hoists in the event those other systems go down for some reason. And so it's more of an electrical mechanical type project, and it just is another way of reducing risk, consistent with the ALARP principles, and something that we've got the internal expertise to pursue. And so let's advance to the next slide. So Palermo Canal, and many of you already know, this is an outlet out of the left abutment. The Palermo Tunnel passes through the left abutment, through the rock, and outlets and then it becomes when it exits through the abutment, it becomes a canal, just a a canal along the side of the hill there. And through the process of the CNA and the L2RA, both efforts identified that if this canal failed and the water came spilling down the hill, it could potentially impact the switch yard, and of course the loss of the switch yard could impact Hyatt. And so this is an area that was identified needing a measure, and so what was identified was an easy measure, and I shouldn't say easy, a very practical and standard measure is to improve the lining of a canal. And so we've brought this forward as something to initiate design on and pursue in the near future in order to reduce the risk of the loss of the switch yard. If you could advance to the next. So this is in relation to the raising of Parish Camp Saddle Dam. If you're not familiar with it, it is in a kind of a narrow branch of the reservoir, and it's a relatively small dam. It's over by Lime Saddle Marina, and it is you can see in the graphic there that it's high up in a saddle. It only sees water. The total elevation is about 890. So it doesn't see water every year, only every maybe 3 or 4 years when we're really topping out Lake Oroville. But what is unique about Parish is its location, and as Bruce mentioned, the potential for a slightly higher water surface elevation under, for example, a PMF flow. And there's a couple other issues with the landslides too that I'll get into. But I just want to note it was one of the highest risks identified, overtopping during an extreme flood. And the key there is that it's identified for beyond the PMF. And that's kind of one of the unique things about these risk workshops, both L2RA and CNA. They took a look at floods beyond the PMF. And so we're talking like greater than 1 in 20,000 annual likelihood. So pretty far out there, extreme loading. And when you start looking at those floods, you start obviously getting higher lake elevations, and these things pop up. Besides overtopping, there are also some internal erosion potential failure modes that plotted in the amber and gray zones. And so raising and incorporating a downstream filter could drive down risks associated with all of those failure modes. And so the graphic shows just kind of what that might look like. Raising the dam a couple feet, adding some downstream filtering on the downstream face of the dam. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so the third group or step, we just wanted to touch upon the pre-CNA planned capital investment. We kind of recognize that as maintaining the recently reduced level of risk, as well as driving down pre-CNA and newly identified failure modes, and improving reliability of key dam appurtenances and critical equipment. You can see the distribution of funding over the current and future years. And many of these projects, initiated maybe 2016, 2017, 2018, and they've got some pretty long durations. Let's go ahead and get to the next slide where we've got a list. Over 40 projects. So once again, things that were already in our plan prior to CNA, and you can see a lot of them relate to Hyatt Power Plant. And of course, within a plant, rotating equipment and systems that just have a shorter lifespan than, say, earthen embankments or large concrete appurtenant structures. And so they require more time or more investment at a shorter time interval. Ones that are kind of in design phase include the Hyatt Power Plant intake gate refurbishment, as well as the penstock inspection and repair. Hyatt Power Plant turbine shutoff valves, that's underway. River valve outlet system upgrades. We've got a package going into FERC and DSOD very soon, probably in July, with some proposed work there. Palermo Tunnel bulkhead emergency closure improvements, and so we've refurbished that bulkhead, and we're looking to get that back staged in place this fall. We've got, once again, on that project as well, some submittals in with FERC and DSOD for that phase of work. And then some radial gate work. There was, some pretty significant maintenance projects following the 2017 event, and we're moving forward with more. Up in the top on the next column, I mentioned the core block drain hole inspections and cleaning, power line refurbishment, Oroville physical security improvements. That's, a lot of new improvements out there that are already in place. And while that's more security oriented, from my perspective, anything to protect the dam, is to me, an improvement on the dam safety side as well. Turbine runners, Bidwell Bar Bridge seismic retrofit, the Hyatt Power Plant fire detection system upgrade. My understanding is that system's in place, and they're probably, I think, still moving forward with kind of some commissioning testing. And so that's really important to our staff that's working within the plant. Seismic monitoring upgrades, the Oroville Lakeside access road. So there's, I believe, a submittal recently made to FERC on that. SEG replacement, and then a Hyatt Power Plant tap guard valve replacement. So a suite of work here that I mentioned already underway. This work is moving forward in addition to these things that have come out of CNA. Let's go to the next slide. So the fourth step, and Sergio and Ted had mentioned the investigations and studies and surveillance enhancements. There's a large body of work there. We are doing it, of course, to reduce uncertainty. These are areas where, there was I think both L2RA and the CNA team that were making risk estimates. There's some areas where, they could use more information, and so that's the intent of these studies. In some cases, rule out hypotheticals, verify conditions, inform other analyses, and really just enhance decision-making overall. And so some specifics, continue the study of forecast-informed reservoir operations, stochastic flood modeling with improved inputs from regional precip and paleohydrology analyses. We've already started some conversations with the Army Corps of Engineers on teaming with them to do that work. The third bullet, investigate feasibility for sampling and testing of the main dam Zone 1 core for erodibility. And so we've got some options there in terms of going back to the borrow pit and getting samples and doing some modern testing with that material. And also potentially we'll look into it, getting samples from the dam itself. And then lastly, some investigations, possibly trenching at the interface of the main dam embankment and episteel monolith 31. So that's another one of those risks that plot a little higher, and that where we need to do more work. We need to validate our understanding of what that construction configuration looks like, validate material properties and things like that. So we can refine our understanding of that, the failure mode that's postulated for that location. Another thing I should mention that I think some of these studies could very well lead to other efforts that are kind of near term, things like procuring more flood fighting equipment and stockpiling it, things that we can do that are going to help us deal with some of these risks as these results of certain studies and investigations come out. And so I think through this body of work, there's probably also some like small, other early implementation type things that will be identified over time. But let's advance to the next slide. More studies. We've got plenty of studies. Evaluating the seismic loadings on the radial gate trunnion anchorages and plans to address aging. And so with the updated seismic loadings, revisiting that topic, and teaming with others on researching the aging of these types of installations. There's plenty of work there, and it's a unique situation for us. A lot of other owners are dealing with the same question, and so we're happy to participate in advancing the industry's understanding of these issues. Reliability assessments. We've done some kind of walk-down level assessments. There's some areas where we could go back in, do a more detailed assessment, really identify which components, with taking the screening results and really diving deeper on those components that pop their heads up as needing either some seismic retrofit, like tying down or bolting, things like that. We've got a need for further inspection of rock bolts and shotcrete in the crown of Hyatt Power Plant. And so this is more of a, maybe a worker safety and also a kind of operational item. And we just want to enhance what we're doing already and get a better sense of the condition of those features. And if needed, plan a project to install more or make repairs. Landslide hazard assessment above or on the downstream left abutment of the main dam above the area control center. So the landslides haven't been mapped there, but there's a need to better assess that area. I kind of envision it as an area that could generate a mud flow or debris flow, something like that. And once again, the concern is the switch yard and the area control center, and how a flow like that might impact those facilities. And then the last bullet, potential for reactivation of existing landslides and the potential for new landslides along the reservoir rim. And the graphic there is a part of the reservoir that captures Parish Camp Saddle Dam, which is the little red box. And the failure mode that was postulated was that one of these landslides, fails and clogs the reach of the reservoir, and a storm occurs, and you get a backup of water that then backs up and starts encroaching on Parish Camp Saddle Dam. And so we've done quite a number of reconnaissance level assessments of landslides, and so the thought here is to really focus in on those landslides that might actually produce that kind of situation, and get a better understanding of their current stability. Next slide. In terms of surveillance enhancements, another early implementation project is to do a better effort and implement new technologies in terms of survey of the embankments. And so that could include these high-density LiDAR or even satellite-based surveys of the embankments, and getting a baseline here in the next year, and then doing that at some periodic effort or after an earthquake or after a large hydrologic event, and looking for any sort of deformation or movements, both through the exposed portions and also some bathymetric surveys. Also installing a new accelerometer on the FCO crest. So there's some inspections that have been identified. An example is the 24-inch air intake that accommodates displaced air from penstock numbers 1 and 2. And then wherever we're installing new instrumentation, working towards making it automated in real time where it's appropriate. And through the spillway recovery efforts, the majority of instrumentation that went in was provided that sort of capability. And so we're looking to just, as we move forward with more instrumentation, add it to that existing platform, and really position us for just better surveillance. Next slide. So this slide kind of addresses the ongoing efforts on the FCO, the flood control outlet structure. That is an area that we're still working on. As Sergio mentioned, we're looking forward to results towards the end of this year or early 2021 of kind of the baseline conditions, particularly in terms of how it performs under various seismic loading. And these efforts started in late 2017 and into 2018 using some two-dimensional linear elastic models. And the recommendation was made to do more advanced modeling. And so that's what we've been working on. And in the far, I guess the middle there, you can see the model with the various components in different colors. And then the far right picture is an example, very exaggerated, example of displacements under seismic loading. And so it's a tremendous model. A lot of energy and time has been invested in it. You might recall the performance-based testing and flow-induced monitoring that was conducted during the commissioning in 2019. We had a professor actually monitor how that structure performs under those loadings, and then use that information to help calibrate this model. And so that's kind of a new direction in dam safety is some of these new technologies, being able to actually take, field measurements and then make sure and apply it to the model and make sure that your model is replicating the same behavior under that same loading. And so we've had great agreement. They've been working really well together, and the model, I think, is in a great state. And so at this point, it's really them working through the different time history loadings, the different earthquake loadings, to provide a suite of results where we can understand the damage at different loadings. And that'll really help guide decision making moving forward on the type of retrofit, the magnitude of a retrofit, and things like that. If we could advance the slide. So once again, why integration? And you've heard it from us many times about integrating these measures into our existing processes. A big part of that is because no dam safety deficiencies or issues identified that require immediate action in this risk context. And so it allows us to take this information, these measures coming out of CNA, bring it into all the other projects and issues we have within our dam safety program, the other 25 state water project dams, help us prioritize them within that program, and then that group of projects and measures, really kind of prioritized at the program level with myself and my staff, feed that up to the larger suite of state water projects or issues, things coming from the aqueduct, the pipeline issues, plant issues, and make sure that across all the assets, we're looking at all those risks, and we're addressing, putting our resources and energy towards the highest risks. And so that's just the basic concept of what we're trying to do. And CNA, the way that they've prosecuted the work and presented the work is tremendously helping us tremendously to just bring that information in and help integrate it with all the other activities and proposed work. We recognize that we need to complete some studies. Some of those are technical, some are planning level, feasibility type studies. And once again, seeking to drive down risk across the entire portfolio of assets, and using public safety as our number one metric and purpose. And once again, the risk management framework is providing us that structured approach to get to consistent and comparable results, especially across the different assets. Next slide kind of shows, this is out of our O&M risk management framework, and it's actually from a ISO standard, just how you kind of work through risk, defining the scope, context, and criteria, risk identification, risk analysis, analyzing the specific risk, and then evaluating it. That's looking at plotting it on a matrix, understanding the uncertainty associated with it, the confidence in your estimates, and then identifying a risk treatment. And as you're working through this process, you need to be communicating and consulting, as well as recording, reporting, and monitoring and review. And so it is kind of a little bit of a living process. There's a lot of back and forth as new information comes in. Each failure mode might need another look, and a risk estimate might change based on the latest study, the latest information. Next slide. So just once again, I figured this question might come up. What's going to happen with the other measures that we haven't necessarily, spoken to in detail today? Some need those studies, those investigations to fill the data gaps, reduce uncertainty. Some of them, we need to refine the risks, based on the new information, and validate treatment measures and verify risk reduction achieved. In some cases, that might mean, holding another workshop and doing a deeper dive on an issue-specific risk. And then, of course, include the measures and projects into our risk management process and register for planning and design. So we capture it and on an annual basis are revisiting, where it fits within our planning efforts. And last slide, this was, yeah, our thinking that, yeah, I understand Sergio, or as I think John mentioned, that we'd have another ad hoc meeting. But beyond that, yeah, we thought that the Oroville Citizens Advisory Commission would be the venue to share progress. Thank you very much.
David, this is Matt again. Thank you for that presentation. You know, it's probably the most transparent and detailed information that we've received in this process as far as the opportunities at Oroville. And you present it in a way that's easy for the general public to understand. Therefore, the importance of having these videos available for general public to reference. On top of that, Liz, if you could take note that some of the slides that were shown, especially his on the capital improvements, did not match the ones that were posted on the website. And the same with some of Bruce's slides were, since they had the 7 and 8 meetings, were not made available for the public on the website. If those could be updated. Further comments will be saved until after break.
So Liz, do we have any questions on the, let's say, I guess, actually, first, Matt, I should address your comments. So I believe there were 2 slides that we had inserted there in the presentation that were new since we had provided these slides to the ad hoc group. Because we provided them back about a month ago. And then, yeah, as you noted, after the 8th meeting, we thought there was a couple of additional slides would be helpful just to I'll link the presentation better to what we were hearing from the IRB. So, yeah, those 2 slides we'll send back out to the group there and make sure you have those available. Liz, any questions from in the chat?
We don't have any, John.
Okay. So at this point on our looking at our agenda here, we're at where we have booked some time for a break. So I'm proposing we're actually only 4 minutes over, which is pretty good for this group here. I think that's a record for our meetings. I'm proposing let's all take a break here for about 10 minutes and then reconvene at 10:15, and we'll start the open discussion here. And so we'll have the I think we're pausing the recording. Yeah, I'll stop talking and let's just reconvene here at 10:15.